Elliott, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ryan. Good to be here.
So before we jumped on, you and I were talking all sorts of war stories about traveling, and I think we could have chatted for hours, but we're excited to have you here on the show. You've
Absolutely.
got a fascinating background as a mechanical engineer, but also have a Harvard MBA. Before we jump into what you do from a due diligence standpoint and the hundreds of businesses you've looked at, tell us a little bit about your background.
Yeah, so I got it honestly. So both my parents were CPAs in Detroit and Chicago. I grew up in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I think through some ups and downs my parents had, I initially was taking sort of a more conservative approach through engineering. And then I realized that I'd be crazy not to take advantage of the fact that I was really good at the intersection of like talking to people and quantitative analysis, whereas everybody else was doing like email only. I was good at speaking to folks. So I kind of transitioned out of the engineering thing, did some strategy consulting, got into Harvard for business school, got tied into the private equity community, which is a very tough community to break into, was able to land jobs at two different private equity firms, and then spun out, recognizing the name of the game is to own equity, like it's private equity because you need to own it. So I started my own private investment shop with a mentor of mine who had been doing it for a while. And then when he kind of slowed down, I started my own company, Spartan Capital, all the time looking at deals sort of $1 to $4 million in EBITDA. So probably a little bit larger than some of the deals I go through now. And then 2017, I started Guardian, recognizing there was a huge gap in the market for top quality sort of diligence and buy side sort of consulting solutions for deals under $10 million. So that's sort of my background in a nutshell.
And I love, Elliot, that you talk about the ups and the downs, and everybody has different experiences in life, and it changes what our risk tolerance is. And sometimes we kind of get that from our parents, and then sometimes we kind of blaze our own path. So I love the fact that, at some point you realized your unique skill sets, that they meshed in a good way and were able to take some risks. And then of course, I love that you just hit on the whole point is owning equity. You'd probably do all these deals and realize, hey, all the people who own all the equity here were making the big upside, and I was kind of left with this little piece over here. And that's just the nature of how things are set up, right? So you have to get into the equity side. Now, tell us a little bit about Guardian Due Diligence. For this call, we're going to jump into a bunch of examples where you've helped people,
Sure.
Due diligence on their companies before they buy them, after they buy them. But tell us a little bit about what Guardian Due Diligence is and what you guys focus on.
Sure. So we have a full suite of buy-side solutions to help people through any piece of the buy-side process, from sourcing deals to evaluating deals to financial due diligence, which I'll touch on more here in a second, to even sort of helping negotiating purchase agreements and even helping people grow businesses post-close. So we have a full suite of services, but 80% of our work is in financial due diligence, which I boil it down to two questions. Are the financials from the company as presented any good? Are they accurate? And the second question is the business worth what the buyer's paying for it? And so we help them answer those two questions with products like quality of earnings, cash proofs, and other sort of specific services based on what our client needs.
So if I'm understanding this, it's basically a one-stop shop for really any entrepreneur acquisition that you're trying to do, probably the search fund community. You've got a really good background in some pretty large deals. If you're talking $4 million in EBITDA that you've looked at for your own companies, plus anything that's kind of below that, right? So these are potentially some pretty large deals. It sounds like you provide pre-close due diligence and then post-close due diligence, or really more of a roadmap. So walk us through a little bit about some of the deals that you've done. Like, I guess with what your focus is on. So are you more online? Are you more offline? So when people start looking at companies, what do you all focus on? What's your background?
Sure. So my background, I've been buying small and medium-sized businesses for over 10 years now. So most of that time I've been a generalist, which means I'm pretty well covered in almost all industries. I stay away from like super high technology, just not my thing. In terms of deals that Guardian focuses on, I would say same sort of generalist idea. Generalist just means we're sort of pretty good in any industry. It'd be tough for you to find an industry we haven't done work in. And then size-wise, we focus, most of our deals are probably $400,000 in seller's discretionary or EBITDA, all the way up to 2 million. So I'd say 80% of our deals are in between that currently. And then the other 20 are sort of either above $2 million in EBITDA or seller's discretionary or below 400,000. So I was doing slightly larger deals than what I focus on now. I think large just because where the market's moving, Ryan. I think you can appreciate that. A lot of first-time buyers, which we spend a lot of time with entrepreneurs who are doing it for the first time, are looking at deals they can do with an SBA loan. They're looking at deals that are sort of sizable enough for their risk tolerance. And so that's where we focus our attention.
That's great. And the fact that you said you've been doing this for 10 years, in some industries, that's not very long. You're an OG in this industry, right? Like you've seen a lot of deals, and you can jump on Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever, and a lot of people talking about buying companies, but very few of them have been doing this for 10 years in the S&B space. So you've probably seen a little bit of everything, if not everything. And I think most of the listeners are hanging out in that range, you know, that 400 to even $1 million, maybe slightly below what you're doing in terms of seller discretionary earnings or EBITDA, in terms of the price that they're looking at. So it sounds like you work a lot of times with first-time buyers. Before we jump into some of the war stories there, what does it typically look like when a first-time buyer comes to you? You know, what kind of typical mistakes do you see on a first-time buyer? The kind of those first few conversations they have with you, or when they should engage you? Should it be before LOI, under LOI? When should they loop you into the conversation?
Sure. So for our first time buyers, oftentimes they engage in our deal sourcing services, which are a bit before letter of intent. And what I find there is people are looking for both sort of how to get in front of more deals. Like I think if you're looking at 1 or 2 deals a week, you're just not looking at enough. We help people get to a number far larger than that pretty quickly. And I think a lot of the mistakes people make, in my opinion, is overanalyzing the limited data you get at the beginning. So you start with these things and either the seller sends you tax returns or maybe there's a broker in the deal and they send you a 5-page write-up and some information, and people will do like 100 pages worth of analysis or like 5 levels of negotiation strategy to get to a letter of intent. And Ryan, you and I know at a certain point, the next thing you need to understand is the seller willing to sell at a reasonable price and structure? And you have to get there quickly. So I think people at that beginning stage spend too much time over analyzing things. Honestly, you need to be prudent, but not overdo it. If you move forward in terms of diligence, I think the next thing, which is related, is people look at data that's not a primary source of data. So if I'm the seller and Ryan's looking to buy my business, I'm like, hey, Ryan, here's a great glossy marketing 30-page paper on Guardian due diligence. We'll call it a confidential information memorandum. And all of the financials will be in nice, cute, lined up things that don't have QuickBooks at the top or Sage software or Zoho financials. The taxes will be sort of printed in nice ways that don't have like 1040s at the top or anything of that nature. And so people spend, I think, a lot of time looking at data that's not primary. The data you should be looking at should have QuickBooks at the top, IRS at the top, or the name of a bank for bank statements at the top. I think people fall in love with deals, particularly first-time buyers. So that business 20 minutes from your house, right in that size range you wanted, in that industry you always want to be a part of, you know, you're out in Utah, so like that ski board manufacturer, like looks really great. You're going to be the dude. And then because you love the deal so much, you don't want to do the work on checking the numbers, and the sellers are typically more experienced and they take advantage of people. And then fourth, I would say not realizing the layered nature of due diligence. So at the beginning, as a buyer, you're sort of interviewing for the job of new owner with the seller because they don't have to sell you the business. They could sell it to somebody else. And so you're earning trust. And I think if you mess up at the beginning, you can give yourself a lot of demerits that are hard to make up for later. And as you build trust, I think the questions can get tougher and the analysis can get tighter. But if you start from like a clipboard with 300 questions, I think that's a great way to screw up your diligence process.
Let's dive into that last piece right there, because I think you said something that I've said a lot, and I probably don't even say it enough. And it's, as the buyer, you're actually interviewing to be the CEO of the seller's company. So yep. You might think as the buyer, oh, I've got all the chips in my on my side because I have the money.
Right.
Walk us through some experiences. You're shaking your head, right? So walk us through what you think about that and how how buyers can actually approach those initial conversations as an interview to be the interview of the CEO.
Yeah, and I'm kind of going to throw some shade to some of the, fancy business school people out here who I'm one of them. But, sometimes you go in here and you're like, oh, I bring the chips to the table. I'm smart. I know how to do my industry analysis. I know how to calculate EBITDA. I'm going to go in and let's say I'm talking to Ryan's business and I've seen people do it. So Ryan, why didn't you charge more money? Ryan, why are your systems so terrible? Ryan, QuickBooks is cheap. Why are you using this Zoho weird thing? Or Ryan, why haven't you hired anybody new in 5 years? And although those are very reasonable questions, because you've built no trust, you're some random person with unqualified ability to buy that the person doesn't know yet. This person is what I call a free man or woman. And if you ever try to put a free man or woman in a cage, it's sort of like putting a wild animal in a cage. You're going to experience the same pushback. And then you haven't earned the right to be at the table yet. And so you have to be careful because people will blow up deals. I've been on calls with clients who have advised not to do this, but they just have to. And they'll go through 25 questions berating the seller, thinking, I got all my questions answered. And then the deal will blow up. Like, what happened, Elliott? And I'm like, you put a free woman who owned the business in a cage. I told you not to do it. It's not in the book anywhere, but that'll blow it. So you have to be thoughtful about that.
Yeah, I think there's different levels as you approach a seller. That first conversation it's very more of building rapport, seeing if you guys like each other. Can you all get along? It's not just a one-time call and you're like, oh, done. It's not you're not buying a used car, right? Like there's so much more back and forth. And I also think of it as having sold businesses myself. Even though I'm ready to sell and I'm ready to move on, it's still my baby. It's still a piece of me. It's still part of my legacy. And people will associate that business with me even years after I'm gone. So I also want to I want to make sure that person has this skill set and the ability to take things to the next level, continue that legacy, and they're also not just going to ruin it, right? And so I've seen a lot of deals where the top offer, the highest money offer was not accepted.
Did not win.
Yeah, and it's super common. It's not all about the money. There are pieces that legacy is tied to it, transition, all those things can play a big factor.
Well, Ryan, something else, and this is the part I think slips people the most. In 90% of deals, the seller is working for the buyer post-close. So they're figuring out what their boss is going to be like. So if you're an a-hole at the beginning, there's a negative amount of value you're creating about the a-hole nature of your management of this person post-close that they're evaluating. Like if I buy Ryan's business, there's going to be a 3-month, 6-month, 12-month transition period where Ryan's working for me. And so he's also evaluating that, and that's not in the book anywhere. But you're right. If you screw that up, you screw the whole deal. I mean, the one person in the whole negotiation who you can't upset without rationale is the seller. You can upset the lawyer, the accountant, the broker. If you upset the seller unnecessarily, you're going to feel the pain. And the other thing is, if you get the seller to love you, the seller can sell you the business for an unreasonably low purchase price as well if they think you're the best steward of the continuation of their business in their market with their employees and their city. Some of these sellers have the last name as like the city name or the street their business is on. You got to be thoughtful more than just like academic in this.
Yeah, I would say every business that I have acquired, there was a huge component of rapport, and I was either one or not the top people that they enjoyed working with. And sometimes personalities don't mesh. That's okay, right? And that's fine. But in reality, like our personalities meshed, and we knew that this wasn't like a one-time transaction, right? There's a lot more that
yes.
You were telling me, Elliott, with guarding due diligence, you're helping people with doing due diligence before they acquire a company. And a lot of times when you do that type of due diligence, you're also giving them the roadmap to this is how you would grow it too. You actually mentioned you had a couple of these calls today. So maybe we can jump into just some examples of things you've seen that have gone well, that haven't gone well, how you save people from, we were joking earlier that you save people from losing their shirt, losing their house, and losing their marriage, because it typically goes in that order and it's all combined. So some examples that you've done.
So the whole reason it's guardian is because I'm sort of like a security guard for people's money and therefore financial freedom. And so it's really an important role we play. because you're right. These deals are $1 million plus almost by definition. And so if you lose $1 million under a personal guarantee, I promise you your life will be different. So let me tell you some ways that that's happened. So I had a situation on a deal where the wife was selling a healthcare distribution business. Great business, Houston, Texas, loved it. Amazing city, great margins. And then as soon as we got through the LOI, beginning diligence, numbers checked out. But when we were going through the purchase agreement where they had to sign up for the non-compete, where it's them and their spouse, they said, oh, wait, my husband has a business that's sort of in healthcare, but not really competing, but I don't work in it, so don't worry about it. It's nothing like this. We're selling this business. We're going to go work in that one. And that sounds great until you realize that the person who you're buying it from takes 100% of their interest in that company, gives it to you. And now the only company they own 100% is their husband's. With all their institutional knowledge, you're setting yourself up to be competed with. So fortunately, we were able to get that deal kind of taken off the table. Another situation where I had a buyer who was looking at a business where part of the business was a coaching business and part was a funded trading business. So people will sort of set up prop desk and have people practice. And if they're really good, they'll start funding them. But the financials were in 4 different bank accounts, 3 different languages, no one single system accounted for all the financials. The seller had 2-page paragraphs explaining everything in exhausting detail. None of it ended up like triangulating data to the same number. And so I advised that buyer to run for the hills. So that's sort of on the protection side. On the execution side, there's still times when you have to be thoughtful. So I have one business I'm working with now where it's a software business, so online, and they bill up front for the next quarter of work. And so that seems really great as a owner. I'd love to bill a quarter in advance. It creates some issues from an accounting perspective of what happens if you're halfway through the quarter and the client doesn't want to continue paying or the service drops and doesn't meet the service level agreement. What is the recourse? And so we had to understand what that was and make some adjustments and advise our client to make some adjustments in their purchase price as a result. But we're dealing with sort of both protecting people from sort of complete financial ruin and then helping people get their dream deal under the right terms at the same time.
Yeah, and it's almost like you're also helping out with the structure. Like that's a really common thing where you book software or services or something where you book the revenue in advance and it might be for the full year, right?
Right.
How would you advise people to structure that deal or have the seller actually leave, the percentage of what hasn't been serviced of that contract in the business? How do you typically go about that?
Yeah, no, Ryan, one of the ways is they collected, say, $1 million in sort of unearned revenue, and that money has to stay in the business until it's been serviced. And so therefore you're sure that money is coming into the business as profit and not subject to sort of clawbacks or whatever. And that may be an escrow, an indemnity, whatever the case may be. The other thing, you may structure it, particularly if the business always bills January 1 to get paid by January 10 for the next year. You might want to close the deal between January 1 and January 10 so that you don't have any excess liability from what the seller may have done beforehand. You may need to diligence the churn rate more judiciously, because if you buy it and there's a bunch of unearned revenue and the quality of the service recently fell off a cliff or a competitor recently came into the market that's taken up market share and you wouldn't know that yet, you wouldn't want to be in a bad way. And so you want to diligence that more. You might also affect the price in an earnout and say, I'll pay you 2/3 at close, right? And 1/3 when we clear a full year financial cycle and true up everything post-close, not because I want to hold your money, but because this pre-earned and unearned revenue piece doesn't allow me to be sure that clients don't have an issue in a period where you sold the business, I'm delivering the service, and I get in trouble. So one of the things that Guardian does different than CPA firms is we're not just CPAs, we're deal people that are managing CPAs and accountants. And so when things come up, we're able to help our clients negotiate structure, purchase price, how to think about things. So we're a more holistic solution for diligence, particularly at this piece of the market.
Wow, there's so many different ways we can go into that, and I think that it just goes to show, even just in a couple examples of there's a million different ways that you can structure deals, and there's so many unique aspects in every single deal that not everything can apply across the board.
Exactly.
You one of my friends is actually going through an interesting deal, and I'd love to hear your take on this. And she is actually buying a company, and the deal had previously got blown up by a private equity firm. It didn't, under contract, ready to go, didn't end up working out. And so now, they're trying to do a really quick sale to her. And I was like, well, we got to figure out why it blew up. So I'm sure you've run into examples of, hey, this deal didn't go through, and you got a buyer calling you saying, hey, they want to move really quickly, but I'm not ready. Right. How do you typically advise people on that so you can make sure you have the right amount of time for due diligence?
You have to think about this as any other long-term agreement you're going to enter into, whether it be a marriage, a mortgage. You're at college for the first year trying to figure out who your friend group's going to be. When something's available of value for a very cheap price, or when somebody's trying to influence you to make a really big decision in 24-hour notice, you have to think about the motivation of the other side. So a big part of what I encourage people to do and what I work through with our clients is everybody's in their own head. What does Elliott want to do? What does Ryan want to do, right? But you're not negotiating with yourself. You're negotiating with the seller. So I advise people, take your head out of it. Put your broker hat on. What's the broker's incentive? Well, 5 to 10% of the deal. So of course they want you to sign an LOI within 24 hours so they can keep their client, the seller, on the hook because they're upset that last deal blew up. Put your hat of the seller on. Okay. They just had a hugely emotional process that they thought was going to be their ticket to financial freedom fall on its face. So they're very emotional. They're very sort of moved. And so very quickly transitioning to something new, whether it's good or bad, or whether it's just kind of like a rebound in a relationship situation just to keep them going, right, is something that makes sense for the seller. Do you want to be that person as a buyer? In financial terms, people might know of a stalking horse, but there's a bunch of different things to call this. And so you have to be thoughtful about why things are happening, and not just in the context of your friend, and I've seen it before. There's also deal fatigue. So sometimes you'll see a deal and they'll say, oh yeah, the first buyer couldn't get the financing. The second buyer was crazy, but you're
the one.
You're the one. And as much as that feels really good to hear, you have to call BS on it and say, well, why am I the one? Let the seller tell me I'm the one. Why am I the one and not a competing business buyer? So being thoughtful, I'll push a little bit because I think people need to hear this. The deal game is also a game of bets, right? And recourse. Meaning somebody comes to you with a hot deal. Like I looked at buying a nurse staffing company 2 or 3 years ago in Florida. And it was a broker I'd known for years. He called me with a hot deal. The seller was really ready to retire, not looking for a huge price. And, I vetted it for a while. And then I kind of said, well, heck, the bet I'm making is a letter of intent, a 2 to 5 page document with my intentions if everything checks out. That's not a huge bet. Now, what I'm actually betting on top of that is travel back and forth to Florida, mind share on this deal, not being able to look at other deals, having a bit of an issue with business development, looking at new deals. So that's your bet. Now, that's one bet. Now, before you start going into paying for diligence, paying for legal, spending a month on a whiteboard trying to figure out how to grow this to the biggest nurse staffing company the world's ever seen, you have to think about what the bet the seller is making choosing you as well. I think people forget that. Have they turned on their lawyer? Have they turned on their accountant? Are they thinking about you when they're at dinner, or is this just a nice to have? And so, yes, look out for things that are available at a price that you think is too low, but also think about where are you relative to the seller and commitment to the deal so you don't get out what we call past your skis, which would make sense for a guy out in Utah.
Yeah. So, well, I've actually never heard of it explained that way, and I've never thought of it that way, but when you are looking at a deal, you might be thinking about this deal 24 hours a day. They're probably not thinking about you much, right? And so if they're not thinking about you, it shows where you are on the hierarchy of are you the number one buyer, or like, do they not even know that you exist at this point? Right. And so
Which happens, yes.
very easy to get down this path where you spend all these hours and time and you're hitting up friends and calling in favors. Hey, I need you to evaluate this for me. What do you think? And then in reality, the seller doesn't know you exist, or you've only spoken with the broker. A question I've always asked myself too, Elliott, is, and I actually ask myself this question with anything, right? Why am I seeing this deal, right? Why am I seeing this house for sale? Because if I'm seeing this house for sale, that means all the investors passed up on it. That are way in the more know than I am.
Right.
Why am I seeing this ad online? Well, it's because I went to this website. It's not any different, right? You're just getting retargeted, and that's how it is. But I think about very especially with businesses, I always ask myself, why am I seeing this, and who passed up on this deal before I saw it?
Where's the smart money too? There's something else to ask. So a lot of the deals that I'm looking at now are in certain industries that are very hot. So roofing is very hot. HVAC is very hot. A lot of professional services that kind of mirror utilities are really hot. Online businesses, particularly sort of FBA businesses, are really hot. So like, one of the things that I think particularly first-time buyers, entrepreneurs should think, are you with the smart money, right? Or are you looking at investments in businesses that are sort of out of favor, right? And so are you betting with the prevailing winds? And then if you are, if everybody's betting on the roofing company and you're finding one at 2 times EBITDA, you feel good that you're betting in the right industry, right? But what does that say about that particular pony that you're about to try to ride off into the sunset? So there's a lot of thoughts about this that you have to be thinking. Also, check the seller. I'll tell you a great story, right? So I was helping a buyer in Chicago last year. A little bit younger than me. I sort of helped them get into the business. And so they were leveraging our services to run one of their processes. And the seller said, hey, you guys don't need to do a set of legal docs. We already have a set of legal docs drawn up. Our lawyer's already done it. We'll get it over to you right away. QOE started. Week 1 of the QOE. Hey, where's the legal docs? Where's the purchase agreement? We want to review it, have our lawyers review it. Hey, no, it's coming. We're still looking at it. Partner 3 is looking at it. It'll be right. Give us like 48. One of the guys, he's kind of old, senile. He's got to look through it. But keep working on that quality of earnings, though. So like 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, and I call my client and I'm like, do you still think they have a purchase agreement sitting on a shelf somewhere? Yeah, man, they said it when I went to go visit. I was like, yeah, I didn't ask that. We're 3 weeks into the quality of earnings.
Ask that. You didn't answer my question.
You're the client, but this is what I get paid to do. Do you think somebody paid a lawyer $10,000 to write a set of legal documents that you haven't seen, not 3 weeks after your letter of intent, but 3 weeks after you started your quality of earnings? Well, Elliott, that is kind of peculiar. Why would they do that? Because a lot of buyers use the quality of earnings to knock down the price. And based on our earlier conversation, Ryan, they don't trust you yet. So if you're going to use the quality of earnings to come back to beat down the price, they don't want to turn on their lawyers. If your quality of earnings comes in reasonably correct, now they're going to turn on their lawyers. But do you want to bet me any amount of money they don't have the purchase agreement that we talked about? No, man, they have it. They have it. A week later, the draft report, the quality of earnings went over to the sellers. And they said, hey, you know what? Why don't we just use your guys' docs? You guys already have them drawn up yet? But those are the kind of things that happen in the deal world where the seller's checking you as the buyer. And if you haven't been in a lot of processes, you wouldn't even know they're checking to see how serious you are and how full of integrity you are.
You're racking up costs, and they're trying to see like, what is it going to be? Not, and so they're not actually spending any money on it yet because they're not fully vested in. So, when you're looking at these types of deals, you've seen so many deals, and just the cadence, the flow of how things are supposed to go. How has that helped you? Like, I guess part of it, what I'm seeing is like, when you're doing one deal, you don't know what you don't know. And then you've seen hundreds of deals on the private equity side, all the way down to the small side. SBA loans, and full seller financed and all cash. Like, you've been able to see this process. How has that been able to help you just like understand like, hey, these two things aren't checking out in terms of a time frame, or you didn't do A, you jumped all the way to D, and now you're on E and F, right? Like, how's that impacted just a lot of the clients that you've worked with?
You know, if I was with a bunch of engineers, I'd tell a story about the old guy in the manufacturing plant that can sniff the paint to see if the mix is wrong. But I'll use a cooking analogy because we all cook. You know that recipe that you like your signature, and you've been doing it for like 10 years, like whether it's your signature like French toast or like that shrimp gumbo that you just like everybody comes to your house and like they don't come unless you cook this thing.
Yeah.
And maybe you're running around that day on the phone and you're like, hold on. That's it's burning. It's too hot. I need to turn the stove down. Or hold on, wait. That's not the right smell. I need to add some more salt or some more pepper. When you've seen hundreds of deals like I have, and a lot of our accountants have, as soon as something gets out of whack, that's not like on a dashboard somewhere, and it's not necessarily somebody shouting in a conversation. It's off from sort of the typical cadence or pattern, what you said, I'm gonna know. And then because I'm not just an accountant, but a due diligence provider, I'm calling my client like, Ryan, I don't think these guys have turned on their accountant or their lawyer yet, which means we're 45 days into a 90-day process and they haven't spent $1. They don't have a broker. They have not $1 of sunk cost, and you have $30,000-$40,000 of sunk costs. Let's have a call and figure this out. Don't you want to make sure they're committed too? Or another way it comes into play, working capital. The best worst negotiation point in almost all of these deals, because no seller wants to give up the revenue they earn that hasn't come in yet. And I don't care how much you want to send them an article on AR, it's revenue they've earned that hasn't been paid to them yet. And you want working capital, and so does the bank. When you've been through so many negotiations on that, I can sort of tell you, worst case, you're probably going to end up here. Best case, you're here. It's 5% of your purchase price. I wouldn't die on this point, kind of push to the middle and keep going. Or the other thing that happens is sometimes the seller is either betting with the fact that the money will come in or against the fact that the money will come in. And depending on that bet, I'll advise my clients differently about how to handle the negotiation. So for instance, if the seller wants to keep all the cash on the balance sheet, but is really comfortable with you taking AR, and some major shift in the business has happened, which might make you think the people's propensity to pay is different, or in this COVID impacted world, they rather have their cash that's hard in the pocket, go home. They're a little bit uneasy about what the businesses they're servicing may do in the next 6 months. In that capacity, the working capital negotiation needs to be different. Now, these are deal specific things, but these are things that the muscle memory helps with, right? Because I can see it coming from a mile away, and my clients get the benefit of that.
No, absolutely. And that's working capital is the biggest thing that you run into. And I would think AR, accounts receivable, basically is a huge sticky point, because exactly what you're saying, based on how people are responding to it, it shows you their confidence of whether that's going to come in or not. And
Right.
you know, is it 12 months overdue or is it 12 days overdue? Those are two very, very different numbers. Now, within this podcast, Elliott, we talk a lot about financial freedom. And I love that this episode was a lot more about the risks, and just, you know, there's a lot of things that are happening, especially as a first time, even second time buyer. There's a lot of things that you can miss. And I'm still learning on every deal. I'm still learning on all the deals that I see. Where can people learn more about you, Elliott, follow you, learn more about Guardian Due Diligence? Where can they work with you?
Yes. So you can go to my website, guardianduediligence.com. On that site, you can book time with me. You can take our assessment to see if we're better than maybe a CPA firm may be for your deal. You can also download a sample report right now without having to sort of speak to anyone. Also, my phone number and email are accessible on the website. I'm also available on LinkedIn, Elliott Holland. That's ELLIOTT, Holland like the country. And then we're also going to do a special offer for your listeners, Ryan. So for people who are listening, we typically do a sort of letter of intent valuation analysis for about $2,000. For the first 5 people to listen to your podcast that come to specialofferwithelliott.com, you'll get that fee waived, and we'll just do the letter of intent review and valuation sort of confirmation pro bono to give your listeners something to enjoy and benefit from.
I love that. Thanks so much. We'll link to all that in the show notes, and appreciate your generosity And when one or two of those actually goes through, we should do a follow-up, and we can even mask all the information, do it anonymously, but we can actually dive into that due diligence report and see what that looks like.
I'd love to.
Thanks so much for a few minutes of your time. I appreciate you having on.
Thanks for having me, Ryan. This has been fun.